Okay, today I'm going to address the deterioration of the relations between Saudi Arabia and the Biden administration and why these relations are being tested nowadays in 2022. As you may know, the pact binding the United States and Saudi Arabia remained untouched and it was very strong in the past decades, despite the critical political events that could have shaken the relationship, right? For example, in 1973, when Syria and Egypt launched an offensive against Israel in order to liberate the territories occupied by Israel during the Six-Day Wars in 1967, Saudi Arabia weighed in and imposed a ban or an embargo on the oil exports in order to pressure the United States, who was sending unlimited amount of weaponry to Israel in order to resist and keep its occupation of the Arab territories. And also later, we also know that the 9/11 incidents and most of the perpetrators were Saudis. So they were like a ground for the deterioration, right? But it didn't happen because the mutual interests in the energy and security sectors, in particular, were too essential to take reckless decisions from each of the sides. Nevertheless, since Joe Biden ascended to power, relations seem to be deteriorating between the two countries whose leaders do not like and do not trust each other. This is very important. It seems that the level of the trust is at the minimum levels at the moment. And at the same time, on a personality level, both sides, the Mohammed bin Salman and Joe Biden, they dislike each other. But in my own observation, I think this disagreement doesn't only stay in the political, like this higher level of the politicians, but also, for example, on social media outlets, you can see the Saudi influencers, and I think those are state sponsored activists on social media outlets in order, to push forward the interests of Saudi Arabia in the online world. The influencers mostly are critical of Joe Biden and his administration, and they are more or less closer to the Republican Party or the Trumpists within the conservative um, or the Republican Party. Now, despite official Saudi denial, the Wall Street Journal reported that Saudi Crown Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the MBS, I will continue calling him MBS in this video. So MBS, according to Wall Street Journal, has mocked President Joe Biden in private meetings, and he made fun of him uh, for his gaffes, and he questioned his mental acuity. I mean, whether he did it or not, probably he did. I don't know, but there is no question that Joe Biden is suffering from certain mental diseases. And we need to question his mental acuity. And when you follow his statements, his speeches, the way he behaves, what he says, and the disruptions between his sentences and his inability to formulate arguments, I would say, in an eloquent way or in a way that politicians or a leader of the biggest power in the world should be able to do so, right? He's unable to do these things, and I think we should question his mental acuity. And that also raises another question. If Joe Biden isn't fit to be a president, then who is ruling the United States and who is making the decisions? This is a very big question mark. So it is no secret that MBS prefers Donald Trump over Joe Biden, and personal preferences may play a role. But what are the main reasons for the deterioration of relations between the two countries that are likely to get only messier? Now, I would like to share with you the article of the Wall Street Journal because they address this exact question regarding this deterioration of the relations. And this article is published only yesterday, and it says US Saudi relations buckle, driven by animosity between Biden and Mohammed bin Salman. Lack of personal trust accelerates a years long split driven by geopolitical and economic forces. Now, made some I summarized the article, I made some notes, and I want to go through this article with you so we can learn together. I liked it, what they say, and I think it's mostly accurate. Geopolitical and economic forces have been driving wedges into the relationship between America and Saudi Arabia for years. But the enmity between Mr. Biden and Prince Mohammed bin Salman has deepened the tension, and it is likely to get only messier. Aaron David Miller, a veteran US diplomat in the Middle East, now at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, he says, there is almost no trust and absolutely no mutual respect between Biden and MBS. But why is that? And why is this main reason for that? The decision by Saudi led OPEC Plus to cut oil production, so raising crude prices at a time of high inflation just before an American election and despite US pleas to hold off, has cemented both leaders' resolve to reconsider a strategic relationship that has underpinned the global economy and Middle East geopolitics for almost 80 years, with once unthinkable retaliatory measures now on the table. The White House has said Mr. Biden wants to review whether the Saudi relationship is serving US national security interests, on top of an administration reassessment last year. Saudi officials say it may now be time for them to reassess the US relationship too. So both sides are questioning the efficiency of this relationship, and both sides are reassessing their priorities, their interests, and what would they gain if they continue in this relationship, and what would they lose if they continue in this relationship. And it seems that both sides are having a hard time to decide whether to declare a divorce or to continue the strategic partnerships or simply to decrease the level of the relationship and the partnership between both sides, which is, I think, something would happen, will happen. They will not cut relationships and they will not keep the strategic partnership on the same level, but this partnership will decrease into lower levels, in my opinion. The Russian invasion of Ukraine and the West's response have exacerbated tensions, since the production cut propped up oil prices that helped fund Russia's war effort and undermined US led sanctions on Moscow. So the OPEC Plus declared that they're gonna cut the production, so decrease the production, which led to the increasing level of increase in the prices of the crude oil. And one of the beneficiaries of this is Russia, who is a big oil exporter, and also I think the United States, because they're also exporting, right? But since the United States wants to impose sanctions and wants to strangle the Russian economy through sanctions and other means, the increasing prices of the or the costs of the crude oil is definitely also helping Russia, and the United States isn't happy in that regard. In the Biden administration's view, the Ukraine war is a decisive historical moment that requires countries to choose a side, with the OPEC Plus cut putting the Saudis closer to the Russians. So here, the Biden administration of the United States in general, they're asking for absolute loyalty. And there is no, you shouldn't ask any questions, you shouldn't pose any questions like the Europeans are doing. They're following completely the American policy in Ukraine, despite the hardships that this American policy brings or bring on the European economy. So the United States, as the leader of a big empire, they want the other countries, the allies and the non-allies, to follow the instructions. Now, this is no time for asking questions or posing questions. But Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, it seems that they are seeing an opportunity to assert their own interests in a world where the US isn't the undisputed superpower anymore, saying they can support Ukraine and work with Russia in OPEC Plus at the same time. Saudi officials say they are frustrated the relationship is still viewed through the narrow lens of oil and security. Riyadh has framed the recent OPEC Plus decision as vital to its core national interests, a technical decision that they say was needed to prevent a precipitous drop in crude prices. Prince MBS now sees high oil prices as perhaps his last shot to use the kingdom's natural resources to modernize the Saudi economy and build a post oil future. I think this is also an important moment for Saudi Arabia, that they can foresee the future. They're able to see that in a few decades, or maximum one generation, there is going to happen major shifts in the global economic systems, and the reliance on the crude oil and the gas may be decreased. Therefore, they are preparing for this time from now, and they want to use the resources they have, which is the oil and the revenues from the oil, to generate as much as money they can to build a post oil economy, a post oil future. So when the time comes, they can still rely on their industrial sector, technological sector, or maybe agricultural, I'm not sure. But they want to empower other sectors or improve other sectors. So when the time comes, in a few decades, Saudi Arabia can still compete in the regional, with the competitors in the region, whether it's economically or politically. US officials said Mr. Biden has pushed the relationship beyond oil by working to deepen ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel, two countries that drew closer under Mr. Trump and are aligned in the view of Iran as the region's biggest threat. So both Israel and Saudi Arabia, they see Iran as the major threat from their perspective. And what Trump did during his presidency, he brought Israel and Saudi Arabia closer. And then we saw the countries that evolve in the orbit of Saudi Arabia, such as the Emirates and Bahrain, they normalized the relations with Israel. Though Israel and Saudi Arabia have no formal diplomatic relations, they have been secretly expanding their security cooperation with White House help. The next big test comes in early December, when three events with major significance for global energy markets are set to collide. Another OPEC Plus meeting and plans by the European Union for an embargo of Russian oil, and by the group of seven wealthy nations to cap the price of Russian crude. The Saudis have signaled that they could raise oil production in December if the market loses Russian oil because of the EU embargo or the G7 price cap, according to people inside the Saudi government. US officials, skeptical that Riyadh would or could do that, say this will be a key litmus test for where the kingdom stands with Ukraine and its Western backers, or with Russia. So the United States is expecting from Saudi Arabia to join the efforts of the United States in strangling the Russian economy through the OPEC Plus, and probably by increasing the production of the oil so that the prices of the oil could decrease. And this is a test for Saudi Arabia from the American perspective. So the Americans want to test Saudi Arabia if um, they want to follow the instructions, or they're going to follow their own national interests. Mr. Biden and MBS tried to build a personal rapport during the president's trip to Jeddah in July, where they first bumped ahead of a 3-hour meeting. But the president angered the royal by immediately raising human rights allegations. People close to the talk said, including the 2018 death of Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist based in Washington who was killed and dismembered by a team of Saudi agents inside the kingdom's Istanbul consulate. Now, I think back then MBS said something about the crimes of the United States when Biden raised the issue of Jamal Khashoggi, and I think both sides, they have no moral high ground to tell anything to each other regarding human rights abuses. Both sides are a big abuser of human rights, unfortunately, and none of the sides have the higher moral ground, in my opinion, to preach or give lectures on human rights. Since the 1940s, Washington's relationship with this insular dynastic monarchy grew around an implicit understanding that the US would ensure Saudi Arabia's territorial integrity, and the Muslim kingdom would keep oil flowing to a global economy dominated by the United States. Those circulations have changed over time. The Saudis once sold the US over $2 million barrels of oil every day, but that's fallen to less than 500,000 barrels a day, according to the US Energy Information Administration. The US grew to become the world's biggest oil producer, and China is now the biggest buyer of Saudi oil, followed by India. After a decade of war, Washington has sought to reduce entanglements in the Middle East to focus on a rising China and resurgent Russia. The main American initiative in the region, the Obama-era nuclear containment deal with Iran, has also strained relations with Saudi Arabia, which opposes lifting sanctions unless Iran also reins in its support for regional militias and the proliferation of ballistic missiles that threaten Riyadh. The Saudis were irked by the Obama administration negotiating with their archenemy about vital national security issues without consulting them. So it's pretty obvious that the United States wants to gradually leave the Middle East, and they want to focus on the rising China and the resurgent Russia from their, this is how they describe. And to do so, they want to finish this the security situation in the Middle East between Israel and the Arabic countries. Therefore, they pushed very hard for the normalization of relations between several Arabic countries and Israel. And also, they destroyed Syria so that Syria cannot pose any security threat on Israel, or maybe overthrow the government and install a puppet government that can strike a deal with Israel. That didn't happen, so it is still an issue there. But Syria nowadays is the army and the infrastructure and the economy, everything is way more weaker than it used to be before the war, right? So it's a partial success, I would say, for the United States in this regard. And since the Saudis know that the United States is leaving the area in order to focus on other priorities, they also see that they are no more obliged to follow the American dictates or what the Americans want in the region. First, they're no more buying 2 million barrel of oil from Saudi Arabia, only 500,000 per day. And at the same time, they are leaving the security issues in the Middle East. They're striking a deal with Iran that angers Saudi Arabia. So there are so many issues that the Saudis aren't happy with the Americans, and they're probably diversifying their relationship with Russia, China, India, Pakistan, and other rising powers, which I think is beneficial for the Middle East. And a Saudi Arabia that is not um, embedded heavily with the United States is a big plus for the region, in my opinion, because in the past decades, the United States used the Saudi ideology, Wahhabism, used the Saudi money in order to destroy several countries in the Middle East, also in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Iraq, and elsewhere. When Mr. Biden was elected, Prince Mohammed huddled with advisors at a seaside palace to complete a plan to woo the new president, according to people familiar with the matter. So, these are the main issues between Saudi Arabia and the United States. It seems that both sides are reassessing their relationship. And as I mentioned, I don't think they will declare a divorce, not under Biden and not under whoever is coming to the White House in 2024. What's going to happen is both sides will decrease the level of the cooperation. And at the same time, I think Saudi Arabia will diversify its strategic relations with China and with Russia, because also the Saudi side can see that these rising powers are establishing a new world order based on multipolarism and not on unipolar system. And Saudis want to play to become an essential player there, instead of being just a follower for the United States, which didn't let any of its allies, whether it's in Europe or in the Middle East or in Far East Asia, to become a strong members of the international community, and they stayed as subordinates or as followers for the United States. So maybe the Saudis are also seeing an opportunity to become a big player, not only in the region but in the world, if a big change happens in the international community or the international system, which is the probability of it to happen is very high, in my opinion. So, what do you think about this? Do you think the relationship between Saudi Arabia will deteriorate further, or or the next president in the United States, probably Trump, will come and fix it again, or what's going to happen in your opinion? This was my opinion. I told you about it, and I think it is a very good thing that the Saudis are detaching themselves gradually from the Americans and diversifying the relations, and by doing so, they're becoming less radical, and the Americans can not use Saudis as they have used them in the past decades to destroy several nations in the Middle East. I've been your host, Georg Almacen of Syriana Analysis. If you like my content on my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. It's a great help. And I'm very thankful and grateful for all the supporters of Syriana Analysis, whether just by sharing and on social media platforms, the videos sharing on the platforms, or sending to your friends. And I'm exclusively and particularly thankful to the supporters of Syriana Analysis through Patreon, PayPal, and other means. All the means, guys, are in the description below. Your financial help is so essential and so important for me, that keeps me continue and bring a content like this, a lot of content like this, hopefully in the near future. And see you next time.